Hi there, folks, and welcome to the next episode of GDL. This is the second episode on Returnal. If you joined us in the first episode, we spoke about a few different things, which I'm going to go through and probably touch on again in this episode. For anyone new to the channel, this is Game Design Live, which is essentially a live deconstruction of a game as we play it. I'm Arran Topalian. I'm a senior game designer at Mediatonic Epic. So the idea is for me to offer some insights and deconstruct some of the gameplay and various aspects of a game as I play it through the lens of a designer. Because it's interesting, right? Like, design is cool and interesting and fun, and hopefully it's something that you want to know a little bit more about, or potentially because you find it interesting yourself, or because you are looking to develop a game of your own and looking for some sort of insights into a similar kind of game. So yeah, this is the second episode. I'm going to be talking about a few key topics, namely conducive design, something I like to call conducive design, problem-led weapon design, and also camera design. So let's just get started and start playing. So again, for anybody that isn't familiar with Returnal, it's a third-person roguelite. And a roguelite is a little bit different from a roguelike in the sense that your progression is somewhat different. In a roguelike, like Spelunky, for example, when you're playing and you die, you lose everything, right? So this is a roguelike with a K. There's no progression in between sessions. Whereas a roguelite with a T, like Returnal or Dead Cells, for example, these are roguelites where there is progression between the two sessions. One being a little more hardcore than the other. Progression is obviously a major part of game design, so it's something that you really have to think about quite carefully when you're deciding what kind of experience you want to create. Roguelikes tend to be a little bit snappier in terms of gameplay style, much more micro-session based, whereas roguelite sessions tend to run much longer. Cool. So, I mean, this is the first weapon we've come across, and it actually leads me on to the first topic I really want to talk about when it comes to Returnal, which is problem-driven weapon design. So, last time in the first episode on Returnal with GDL, we talked about the fact that several weapons in Returnal, while really cool in a number of different ways, the sound effects, the visuals, the type of projectiles they fire, at least for my part, it could just be that I'm a bad player, which is also very likely. But for my part, a lot of the weapons that Returnal offers, I don't use all that often. And the reason for that is because a lot of the time, the problems that you're facing in combat in Returnal are by and large the same, which is that you need to be moving very fast. You need to be constantly on the move because enemies are also constantly on the move and shooting at you. So this is what you call a combat problem. Your enemies are designed and behave in a certain way that creates a certain situation for the player to solve. It's almost a puzzle. It's a moving puzzle. The weapons that you give the player are the tools they get to solve that puzzle. If some of those tools are just not fit for the job, then players simply won't use them. So you're almost creating content that's redundant, for want of a better word. So this is the carbine. We are going to talk a bit more about the weapon design in terms of the progression the weapon design offers in Returnal. But this is the carbine, which is essentially a machine gun. And I have found it to be the optimal weapon when playing the game. And this is another key word that I do tend to bring up in other episodes and will continue to bring up because it's an important one to ram home, which is that players will often look for the optimal solution when playing a game. It's sort of the meta of almost any game out there. Players are looking to solve the problem in front of them in the best way possible, in the most optimal way possible. Which is why problem-driven, you will find that whenever I'm trying not to die, I might stutter a little bit in between sentences. I'm going to try and get a little bit further for you guys so we can get to some of the extra stuff that I didn't get a chance to do last time because I sucked so terribly the entire time. I promise I'm going to try and do a little bit better this time to get further. So yeah, enemies tend to be fairly similar in terms of their design varies considerably, right? So the way they move, the way they attack, that all does differ. But how they interact with the player is by and large the same, which is that they tend to chase the player and push forward toward the player. They don't tend to offer things like shields or cluster up in certain ways, which means that rapid-fire weapons tend to be the most optimal. So this is what we mean by problem-driven weapon design. You want to try and think about what problems you're going to present the player with, and then how your weapons can help players solve those problems. If we come across a weapon that does suffer from this, then we'll definitely point it out. So for anyone who isn't familiar with what these things are that I'm picking up, they're either health chunks or resin chunks, which isn't super clear in the minimap, but basically it's a way that Returnal offers rewards for more skilled players. So if you're a skilled player who typically doesn't take damage, you'll often find more of these resin chunks throughout the map. And resin chunks fill up this little bar that you can see in the bottom left corner, these little stack of bricks that you can see. The one out of 3 is lit up at the moment. And when these bricks are fully lit up, and all 3 are lit up, I get bonus health. Or rather, I get bonus health added to my max health. Which basically means that if I'm playing well, I'm rewarded for that performance by getting more health. So Returnal really does offer skilled players a fair amount of incentive. You're very much encouraged by the game to get good, and to get good fast, which lends itself to a certain type of experience, right, for a certain type of audience. It's maybe not something that a 5-year-old would enjoy, but it's maybe something that an older player would enjoy. It is absolutely a learning experience for me, Black Ice. Like, I'm a senior designer by trade. That's what I do for a living, so being able to talk to you guys about this kind of stuff, hopefully it's interesting to you, but it also helps me massively in terms of just honing those observational skills when it comes to breaking down a game's design and understanding why things have been done a certain way. It's so often the case that when you're playing a game, whenever anyone is playing a game for that matter, that you almost don't see all the bricks that are involved in making a game what it is. It's just a whole set picture. You're not looking at the individual colors, right? But every single color, so to speak, sticking with that metaphor, has been very consciously chosen. And that's why it's such an interesting field. So you've seen there, the thing I just fell into, I'd like to call out, I've sort of just like breezed right by it. The little sort of hole that I fell into a second ago, I think it was just here, it was hinted at by a little sort of gleam on the ground. These are hidden rooms that Returnal offers players. They're not shown on the minimap, and there's a reason they're not shown on the minimap. In a lot of games, you tend to offer players reasons to explore. If a player is going off and exploring your world, you want to give them a reason for doing that. With most of the other stuff in this game, it's shown off in the minimap. So collectibles, pickups, weapons, doors, whatever, you name it. But the one thing that isn't shown, and shown for a good reason, is these little secret rooms that you can find along the way, because they're exactly that. They're meant to be little sort of hidden prizes that players are given in exchange for taking the time to explore the environment and in turn get some sort of extra prize. It's a lot like, for anyone who's familiar with Castlevania or Metroid Prime, it's a lot like the sort of hidden rooms that are disguised with what look like ordinary walls. And it's a convention that's stuck around since then. Oh, this is cool. So, when it comes to animating in your game, obviously it depends on the style of the game, but little bits of attention to detail that really make the player feel like they're in the environment and also just make them feel cool are super important. It's the little details that tend to really distinguish fantastic experiences from just great ones. So when I land on this spot here, bam, you get the superhero landing. They didn't have to include that. It could have been just a regular old landing when you fell. But the fact that they did it, it doesn't add anything to the game, it doesn't power you up in any kind of way, it's purely just to drive home that sense of you're in this world, and give you kind of a wow moment to make you feel good about yourself, which is what a game really is all about, right? We spoke about it last time on the first episode on Returnal, that the enemies do offer very clear what's called attack telegraphing. So attack telegraphing is something that enemies do when they're about to attack. It's exactly what it sounds like and what it says in the tin. So this guy, for example, offers a very clear attack telegraph where he offers up a sort of sign of a laser, telling me in no uncertain terms I'm going to fire, and this is where I'm going to be firing, so I don't want to be standing there. And the reason this is done is to allow players to make informed decisions. There's a really fantastic quote by Sid Meier, which I'm probably going to butcher in trying to quote, but I will do my best to remember, which is that a game is essentially a series of interesting choices. And these choices aren't just things like, in a dialogue tree choosing A or B. We're talking like micro-moment decision-making here and choosing what to do. So knowing where an enemy is going to fire and when it's going to fire allows me to make a choice in that instance, which is super important. And also it sucks, like I'm sure you've all experienced it, where you're in a game and you get hit by an enemy and you had no clue the attack was coming, and it feels bad, right? It almost doesn't feel fair. And this is exactly why clear attack telegraphing, especially in a fast-paced game, is so incredibly important, and why Returnal does such a great job of making sure that it's done. Oh boy, speaking of which, there we go. Let me just get out of the way for a second. So we're going to have a look at this chest too. This taps into something else that I really wanted to bring up in this episode, which is the importance of synergy in roguelites. So synergy is a concept where, and you may have experienced this yourself in other roguelites, if you're a fan of those kind of games. Synergy is the concept of finding weapons or powers or buffs or whatever else that in some way, shape or form go well together. So a really bad example is if you have a gun that does ice that you decided to pick up, and then you find a special item that means that whenever you do ice damage, it deals plus 10 damage. That's a really bad example of a synergy, but that's how it works. And Returnal does the exact same thing here, where you're looking for synergies in your build as you play, which is very satisfying and tends to be the case in most roguelites. Another part of a roguelite, which I want to call out real quick, is these containers. So another aspect of roguelites is risk versus reward. So whenever you're in the world, there's usually these things like those chests we were just looking at. I'm actually going to run back and just break down the text real quick to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. This chest here isn't just an ordinary chest that I can open up to get something from it. It actually comes with conditions. So here we have a container with presumably valuable items, but is infected with malignancy. Malfunction probability moderate. So what this means is that if I open this chest, there's a moderate chance that I'll receive essentially a curse, and that curse will affect my gameplay in some way, shape, or form. So I can choose whether or not I'm in a good place to open this chest and take whatever inside, or I can decide otherwise and just leave it. So in this circumstance, for example, if I was just a regular player with very poor health, because I've been playing terribly, I probably don't want to open this guy, right? But if I fancy my chances, then I might just do that instead. And we're going to go ahead and do that so you can actually see what this mechanic involves. Okay, so unfortunately, I did get cursed. And this malfunction is reduced repair efficiency. Let's bring that up again. Reduce repair efficiency by 30%, collect 1 parasite, which I think is a really cool addition. It's not something I've seen before in a roguelite where your curses come with gameplay objectives almost. It's a way of sort of driving gameplay through curses, which is a really cool and interesting dynamic. Alright, I have no idea where I am right now. I'm probably way off on the wrong side of the map. Let's just check it out. We talked about the map last time in Returnal as well in the first episode, but I'm going to quickly touch on it again because it's just such a masterclass in terms of map design. Whenever you're playing a game like this that offer large environments, a minimap is obviously helpful because it tells you exactly where you are in the environment. But more importantly, Returnal's minimap does a fantastic job of telling you, and this comes down to their UX design, which again is a very cognizant choice. It tells you exactly where you've been and where you've not been through these door icons that they offer. So you'll see this one here is grayed out versus this one here, which is sort of a light blue. So I know for a fact that I've not been this way. This door is not grayed out. This door is. So if I want to go back and explore the map more, it's very easy for me to tell which ones I've not gone through and which ones I have. It just makes exploring the environment that little bit easier. So your player isn't thinking about or trying to figure out these really boring subjects like where have I been and not been versus just playing the game and having a great time. Okay, luckily we are going the right way. Go me. Let's go down here.
I can still recall what she said. That woman who uses my voice, who isn't me. The deepest of the deep. I believe her now.
So for anyone who's played a game like Portal 2, you do tend to find that in games where you're the only thing alive, and essentially in Returnal that is what's going on, you're the only sentient creature that you ever really come across is yourself. And like in Portal 2, this does result in a bit of a situation where you've got no one to talk to. You've got no one to listen to, you've got no one to talk to. Or Portal 2 actually does something clever to get around that problem, actually, which I'm going to come to in reference. In Portal 2, what they do is they give you that little robot guy, I forget his name, someone else probably remembers it and is far smarter than I am. But in Portal 2, they added in the robot companion that every so often follows you around and intersperses dialogue throughout the game. I think GLaDOS did sort of fulfilled that role in the first Portal. Wheatley, thank you, Black Ice, thank you. How could I forget that as well? Stephen Merchant is a legend. And in Returnal, the way they get around this is by sprinkling these scout logs throughout the world. So weirdly, the only company you have is yourself, but it does at least mean that the player is given a little bit of company. There's just, it isn't the case that there's no dialogue throughout the entire experience. It's very rare in across the various games that I've played, probably hundreds, and when designing games, that you leave a player in a position where there's just no one to talk to ever. And this is how they get around that.
I caused the downfall. Exquisite sacrifice. When I plunged into the depths, the drowning Sphinx asked me this riddle at the cost of my soul. How do you heal a wound within a body that cannot be healed?
Okay. I'd like to say thank you to Rebeat All as well for the follow. Really much appreciated. Or very much appreciated, rather. I can say really much appreciated. That makes sense. So you will find as well, if you play Returnal, that when you first start off, you'll see right now that I'm underwater. When you first start off playing Returnal, you'll not have access to these kind of areas. You'll not be allowed to go underwater. This is what's referred to as permanent progression rewards, and is a very Metroidvania, what's called Metroidvania mechanic, where the player is every so often given a prize that allows them to do things they couldn't do before, whether it's a double jump or a double dash or whatever it is. It's usually something that allows them to gain access to areas that they couldn't get to before. And there's a couple of reasons that developers and designers do this in games, but the main reason is that it creates a sense of intrigue when you're running through an environment for the first time. Mystery is a very powerful driving force in almost anything, whether it's books or films or games. And adding an element of mystery in terms of what is over that cliff, what is behind that door that I can't get to right now, is a very powerful motivator, which is why Returnal does what they do. When you first start off, they show that there are prizes, for example, and treasures underwater that you can't get to, telling you that at some point you're going to be able to, you're just not sure when, but you really want to get there. This is a good opportunity to talk about something else that we did talk about in the first episode on Returnal, but I'm going to bring up again because it's a really useful thing to be aware of, especially if you're designing a combat-based experience. It's called the door problem. The door problem basically is an issue raised by someone called Liz England in an earlier article that was released a little while ago. The idea is that if a player has a door, what they'll do, without fail, is they'll pop into the door, get some shots off, and then back through the door to get a second to breathe, reevaluate, and then pop back in, do some shots. Not those kind of shots. Not fun shots. Well, these are kind of fun shots. Where's the enemy gone? Did I get him? I think I got him. So yeah, that's the door problem, basically. So what happens is that we talked before about optimal solutions in games. This is a prime example of an optimal solution. And if there is one, by and large, that's what a lot of your players are going to end up doing. So your game devolves into the door problem, which is players doing the same thing over and over again to achieve the best result. And there are various ways of getting around this. Returnal does get around it, but only sometimes. For the most part, the door problem is something that is present. I did try, guys. I promise I did. But it's okay, because we're going to touch on a bunch of other stuff. So the next thing I'd like to touch on, since I've been reset, But it's okay. We can talk about some other stuff. The next thing I'd like to touch on is camera design. So a lot of the time when you're playing a game, the camera of the game is something that is almost like a silent winner. You appreciate it without even realizing that you appreciate it. There's often a lot of thought and care that goes into the position and zoom and field of view of a camera for a game. It's actually one of the what are called the 4 C's at Ubisoft. One of the C's being camera, the importance of camera. Camera is king because it's what you're looking at, right? It's how you're seeing into the game. So obviously, it's of massive importance. And there are a couple of things to be aware of when you're playing Returnal. The fact that, for example, let me just go over here for a second. And it's such a small thing, you probably wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for it. I'm just going to put the camera like this for a second. You'll notice the camera isn't looking directly through the main character's back. If it was, the main character would actually be a little bit higher on the screen, and the camera would be a little bit lower, because it would be looking right at the back. What tends to happen in third-person games is the camera is actually lifted up a couple of inches higher than the center of the player's back. And the reason for this is that where's the one thing you don't want to really be looking at when you're playing? It's the floor, right? The floor is probably the most boring thing in the game. I mean, it is actually quite a nice, pretty floor. But when you're playing, it's the last thing you want to be looking at, right? You want to be looking ahead of you. You want to see vistas. You want to see more enemies on the screen at any given time. So you tend to find that a well-adjusted camera is one that doesn't give too much priority to the floor of the game. If we go on a bit further, actually, you can see this is a much better example because the camera actually zooms out ever so slightly after you leave the hub area. But again, this is an even better example. The amount of screen ratio given above the character is vastly more considerable than below their feet. And this is very much a conscious choice when designing your camera. Okay, bear with me while we mop these guys up. You tend to find as well that in Returnal you do something really cool with the attacks of enemies. So attacks tend to be one singular color. There are some other colors they use for attacks, but by and large they're red. And red is a color that is sort of retained exclusively for enemy attacks. I'm going to die again any second now. Not even attacks for that matter, but anything sort of enemy related tends to be sort of have a red hue to it. Oh, wow. We also spoke last time about the fact that Returnal doesn't ask players to go looking for ammunition, which is a really important distinction. Oh, wow. But yeah, they don't ask the player to go looking for ammo. In any other shooter, in almost any other shooter, you tend to find the players are required to go looking for ammo. They find ammo, they can go back to the fun. Returnal does a really interesting trick where they do away with the concept of ammo entirely. There is no ammo. Instead, your guns use a sort of like an energy supply. You can see there at the bottom of the reticle that every time I fire, I draw out bullets, and then if I leave the gun for a second, it fills back up again. So I still have to be careful with my shots. I don't have an infinite clip. There is going to come a point where I'm going to have to reload and I'm vulnerable for a second or two, but I don't have to go off looking for ammunition. I just get to go and have fun. No homework. That's the way I'm thinking about it. It's no homework. Because who likes homework? I like homework. If there are any areas of the game that anyone would like a bit more information on, or would like me to explain a little bit more, or deconstruct a little bit more, it could be absolutely anything, then please do shout out in the chat. I'm more than happy to switch track and talk about anything that you guys are interested in. Otherwise, I'll just crack on and bring up little bits and pieces as I go. These things that I'm picking up every so often as well, we did talk about this in the first episode, but I'm going to bring it up again. These things that enemies drop are called obolites. It's sort of like a cheap common currency the player finds every so often. And there's a couple of interesting things to call out there when it comes to obolites, or indeed any kind of currency along that line in other games. it does a couple of things. The main thing is that it's something for the player to pick up frequently. Picking stuff up in a game is usually fun. Just the concept of picking something up, maybe because that's something that's quite fun in real life, is finding things that we can collect or accrue. But picking something up, it also provides a frequent sense of progression. Games tend to have what are called short, medium, and long-term goals, especially when you're designing games from scratch. That tends to be something that you have to think about a little bit. And then you have very short-term goals like collecting currency. And this is why oblites tend to feature, or some sort of spendable currency tends to feature in games. Roguelites in particular. Yeah, but the other thing I wanted to call out with roguelites, which is quite interesting, we're not going to be able to see it just yet. We might need to find an enemy first. Let's see if we can find a fight. But I'm going to call it out now so you guys can be looking for it. So when an enemy is killed, they usually drop oblites. But what's really interesting is that oblites have a timer on them, and it's quite a tight timer. After about 4 or 5 seconds, if even that, they disintegrate and vanish and are gone for good, which is done intentionally. If I had to guess as a designer, the reason for this is to encourage players into the fight. I can choose to hang back and shoot from a distance. That's a choice that I'm allowed to make if I want. But if I do that, there's a price to pay, which is what we talked about before with risk and reward, and it's another great example of Returnal integrating that into even their combat and currency collection. I can choose to hang back here, which is safer. I'm going to take less damage, enemies can see me less, I'm less in the line of fire, but it does mean that whenever they're dropping oblites, after 4 or 5 seconds, this currency is vanishing. So if I want that currency, I'm going to have to make that choice to get involved in the thick of the fight. You'll notice as well that the music of Returnal is quite interesting. It's quite common in games, but it's worth calling out anyway, which is that the music changes very drastically when you're going from a combat situation to a non-combat situation. It's a nice way of offering players a cue of saying you are currently in danger. Even if you can't see the enemy, you know walking into that area that yes, this is a problem, I need to clear the situation. And also it's a nice way of telling players very kind of organically, you solved the problem. As soon as I kill this last enemy, he said, the music calms right down. In fact, the music is almost non-existent. I don't think there even is any music right now. This is not something that's just kind of done for the sake of it. This is to tell players organically and passively, job done, mission cleared, without having some sort of message that comes on the screen. We should take this to show up. So this is one of the weapons in the game. What was it called? I forget already. The Electropolon driver, he said, trying to pronounce it, probably terribly. The idea is this weapon puts down these sort of lightning rod things, allowing you to create traps. So far, you've probably seen what the combat experience in this game is like. Being able to put down traps where you're running around and trying to, dodge a flurry of different bullets all over the place is quite challenging. And again, so it comes back to that optimal solutions factor, right? It's not a weapon that I'm going to take really in any circumstance because I don't really see how that's going to help me survive. And also, enemies tend not to cluster up. If there was a type of enemy or a certain biome where enemies did cluster up, then yeah, maybe it's something I'd be tempted to take. But because enemies tend to behave in the same way, this is a weapon that doesn't really solve any problems for me whatsoever, and therefore something I'm just never going to use. So when designing your weapons in a game, it's really important to think about what kind of problems your game is going to be offering players, and then in turn, what your weapons can do to help players solve those problems. So this is another example. These are parasites. So parasites are another great example of risk versus reward in Returnal, where I gain a buff, but I also receive some sort of downside. It's a double-edged sword, basically. And Returnal is full of them. So double oblite collection radius, but increases malfunction probability. I'm going to go ahead and take that. Bam, sticky thing. And what's really cool with Returnal is that they don't just add that to your UI or inventory somewhere. They actually show these parasites on your avatar, which again is a really conscious choice. Returnal is quite big on what's called diegetic UI or diegetic UX. Diegetic is a term that's used to refer to UX or UI that's actually in the game world. So it's not plastered on the screen. It's almost something the character themselves, the avatar, if they had a real brain, would be aware of. So a fantastic example of diegetic UX and UI is Dead Space, if anyone's played Dead Space. In Dead Space, your health is represented not by some sort of bar on the screen, but by a bar that actually runs down your spine. So the health bar is actually placed in the game world, which is a kind of an interesting touch, right? Far Cry 2 is also a great example for diegetic UI, if anyone's interested in checking that out. But yeah, Returnal does go to quite a few lengths to offer diegetic experiences when it comes to that kind of stuff. Oh, Black Eyes, I totally get where you're coming from. I'm sure you were just as excited as I was to see they're doing a remaster as well, which I really cannot wait for. Which was your favorite? Tell me your favorite Dead Space. Tell me why it was your favorite Dead Space. Yeah, the storytelling in Dead Space was truly fantastic. I have to say, the storytelling in Returnal is also really impressive. We talked about this in the first episode. Their environments, their environmental design, so you'll see the kind of the scale and size of the environments that you're exploring in this game are quite massive. And this is something that's contextualized through the narrative design of the game. So it's not just the case that this is a big environment because it's a big environment. They actually provide an excuse for the size of this game world, which is the inhabitants, or the old inhabitants of the game, were much taller than an average human. So it stands to reason that a much taller, a taller than human creature would build bigger environments, right? Like the size of the doors, for example. He said, looking for a door. For the first time, I can't find a door. I've been finding doors this entire time. Is this door over here? Let's check this out. Okay, I have to survive to get over there, but we can do it. So yeah, for example, you look at the size of this door. This is something designed by an alien creature that's much taller than us. So they contextualize their world through their narrative, which is a really nice touch. Again, it's not something that your game needs to do, but I often think that great design goes to the sort of extra mile and creates a more cohesive experience as a result. And I agree, Dead Space 1 is also my favorite. Dead Space 1 or also the final Dead Space, just because the story just came to such an interesting and cool climax. But yeah, Dead Space 1. I usually find the first game of any franchise is the one that makes the best impression. I also really like the upgrade system in 3. I thought it was really well done. We're gonna die again, guys. There is an enemy I'd really like to find, so we can talk a little bit about something I like to call conducive design. If we don't find it, that's okay. I can go ahead and talk about it anyway. We're going to go ahead and talk about it anyway. So, conducive design is... It's not a term that's often used in the industry. It's something that I tend to use myself as a sort of mental concept when thinking about design and game design in general, just during my day-to-day job. Is the idea of your core features and mechanics driving other aspects of your game's design. So by that I mean that, let's take the fact this game is a shooter, for example. In fact, let's just take any shooter as an example. In any shooter, you tend to find that head damage does more damage than body damage. That's an example of conducive design. You're offering the player a way of using your core mechanic, which is shooting, in a way that adds to their experience and gives the player something extra to do. They don't have to shoot the head, but if they do shoot the head, which requires them to aim better, they get a reward for it. This is what I mean about conducive design. What the heck was that? So whenever you're designing a game, it's really important, in my opinion at least, to really think about conducive design. Like, what are the core mechanics of the game that you're doing? Oh, come on. What are the core mechanics or dynamics of the game that you're designing or thinking about? And how can your extra mechanics and features or whatever else tap into and draw from that core mechanic or dynamic. Puzzle games are usually really good at that. The Witness in particular, if anyone's interested in something that's really a fantastic example of that. The Witness takes a single mechanic and takes it as far as you can possibly imagine. Definitely worth checking out, if you're into puzzle games, of course. So you'll see here, you often find in game design that you have what's called a visual language. Visual languages are a term that are thrown about quite often in the industry, and visual languages basically refer to identifying certain colors or silhouettes that the player can learn to mean a certain thing. So purple, for example, this barrier, usually barriers in this game you can dodge through. You know, you can do this super cool little dodge thing, and you can dodge through a barrier. The player is soon told that purple, anything purple, is something you can't dodge through. Red, you can dodge, purple, you can't. And this is something that's consistently applied throughout the game, creating what's called a visual language. Again, we've got some new viewers on the stream. If anybody's interested in anything in particular with this game, or game design in general, it can be anything whatsoever, but if you'd like me to dive into more information on a certain area of the game, then please do shout out in the chat. I'll be more than happy to talk about it for you. I'd also like to say that if you're enjoying the content, do please follow me. It's a new channel. I'm looking to sort of grow over time. If you're interested in sort of gaming-related news or gaming psychology and related articles, you can also check out my Twitter, which is at @Topalian. I tend to stay quite well informed because, like I say, it's my job. But if you're into that kind of thing, then do please give it a check out. There you go. So purple, once again, we're seeing purple. We're seeing red, means I can dodge through it. Purple, we cannot. This is me just trying to stay alive to get just a little bit further. Oh. You'll also notice that enemies do different numbers of attack. So you tend to find that weaker enemies have a very limited number of attacks, and they're also slower attacks, they're weaker attacks, whereas tougher enemies have more attacks and do more damage, which is quite common in game design when it comes to enemy design. Returnal being no exception. I really appreciate that, Black Ice. It's been great having you. I look forward to seeing you again. Be sure to check out the VOD. It'll be there waiting for you. I'd also like to say that this is the second and last episode on Returnal. If you're interested, you can check out the first episode, which is also a VOD on my channel. We've got the next episode airing next Monday, where I'll be checking out Death's Door. Death's Door is an isometric hack and slash action game. It does some very cool things. It's sort of like Dark Souls blended with a little bit of Legend of Zelda. And then the following Wednesday, we'll be looking again at the second episode on The Ascent. If you're interested, you can check out the first episode on The Ascent again on my channel. You can see that I'm really good at gaming, right? Game design, not too bad. Gaming, I could do better. So we talked before about short, medium, and long-term goals in a game. Returnal does go away to offer players that, and it's probably one of the best examples I've seen of offering players medium and long-term goals in a roguelite. Other roguelites that I played, such as Dead Cells, for example, or Curse of the Dead Gods, also a fantastic game. They do offer progression. Dead Cells is a good example in the sense that they offer weapon collection as their primary means of progression. Returnal doesn't just offer weapon progression, they actually go an extra mile. So I think this is actually going to be a weapon, which is going to let us check out what I mean by that. So if you check out the weapon there, we've got a bunch of different things on this UI. We can see here what kind of alt fire it's got, which is the vertical barrage, but more interestingly, we can see these buffs at the bottom of the UI. And one of these is payload rounds at 0%. So what this basically means is that if I want to unlock payload rounds, I need to equip this weapon and use it enough to unlock that buff. So the next time I come across a Tyomatic carbine, he said, quickly and easily, with payload rounds, it will be available for me to make use of, which we're going to go ahead and do because it's a really good weapon. And this is an example of medium progression in Returnal. It's a goal that we're giving the player, that Returnal rather is giving the player to strive towards. And goals are a huge aspect of any game experience or gamified experience. As human beings, I spend quite a lot of time looking into psychology or behavioral psychology. It's very helpful when it comes to designing games. As human beings, we have a real need to complete goals. We tend to not like to leave things unfinished. And this is where really goals come into game design. You're telling the player, here's a thing that you have to do, and you've not finished it yet. And from a psychological standpoint, that's very compelling. And not every game does this, or rather some games offer goal creation in slightly different ways. Minecraft, for example, is a really interesting one in the sense that it does offer goals, but it also allows players to create their own goals. You allow players to create their own goals on the fly. I want to build a treehouse. I want to add a swimming pool to my underground cavern, which is something then they can go off and do and create new goals for themselves in the process. But you tend to find that games that are able to do that kind of thing involve a certain level of creativity. 9 times out of 10, games that don't involve creativity struggle with player-created goals. That's a really interesting question there from the Naked Martian. If you were to ask me, I would say that it taps into the dynamic of a roguelite fairly well. Roguelites tend to offer players a lot of choices, which you have to make in the moment. So whenever you find a weapon that doesn't have, or rather has a buff that's locked, it's up to you to make that call. Like, do I want to take this weapon and fill in that goal, or do I want to just stick with the weapon I've got and not bother? But I also take your point entirely. Like you say, it's an interesting way of looking at it, where potentially you could say that it dissuades players from trying new guns in the game. So it's definitely an interesting way of looking at it. Roguelike, that's not the name of the game, it's Returnal. Returnal is very much a game about choices. Like, do I want to take the risk? Do I want to take this weapon? Do I want to go into that room? There's a lot of micro choices that the game offers you, and that seems to be sort of like part of their design philosophy that goes right the way through its spine. Wow, I've never seen that before. That was terrifying. How did I get this skin? That's a good question. I'm pretty sure that it's back when you're in the ship. When you're spawned, if you go back to your ship, there's a sort of console panel that you can check out, and I think there's 3 different skins there. And this is the one that I decided to pick, which is quite cool of the developer. Again, it's not something they had to do, but it gives you a little bit of personalization, so you feel maybe a little bit more connected to your character as a result. So we talked about attack telegraphing before. This is another good example of attack telegraphing in action. There's a very clear reason as to why these lasers show little sort of like bubbles of color before they actually fire their laser. If the beam just fired and you had to rely on timing alone, it's a far more punishing experience. But the fact we're given a warning so we can make that informed choice and react accordingly is super important. And different games, depending on the experience that developers are after, go about this in different ways. Some games offer purely attack telegraphing without any visuals whatsoever, in terms of VFX. It's all animation-based. So a good example of this is Dark Souls, where 9 times out of 10, enemy telegraphing is communicated purely through physical movement of the enemy, whereas in Returnal, they really double down on using VFX to signify attack telegraphing. And the reason for this distinction, in case it's of interest, 9 times out of 10 in game design, things or decisions are informed by other things. Everything is connected. So in Dark Souls, to go back to that example, it's a far slower paced game. It's a lot less chaotic, but it's also a lot more intense. So needing to know information on the fly very quickly is less important than something like Returnal, where it's very fast paced, frenetic, and you really need to know exactly what's happening every second of the way. Oh boy. That's gonna hurt. Okay. Let's check this out. I mean, nah. You'll notice as well that enemies have this little bar that increases along the bottom part of their health bar. I say that, I just blew that guy to smithereens. Let's see if we can find another enemy. But yeah, oh, there we go, there is one. If I just shoot this guy, there's a little white bar that appears just beneath the health bar. This is what's called their stagger mechanic. So if this bar fills up, I killed him again. If this bar fills up, it's what's called staggers the enemy. It's quite a common mechanic, especially in the last sort of like 2 years. Final Fantasy VII Remake did a great job with their stagger mechanic. And it essentially means that if you deal enough hits to the enemy, they're what's called staggered for a moment, which basically means that they're interrupted, they don't deal any damage, they stay in the same position, and you're able to get some more sort of extra free hits in. I really would like to try and survive this fight. So this is oh great, this is exactly what I was looking for, although I'm very close to death, but we're going to try and get a look at it. This enemy here offers a weak spot. It's very rare in Returnal, not many enemies offer it. Usually with the very intense enemies, they offer a weak spot, because it's a shooter game, right? So you want to make sure that there's at least some moment in the game where you're rewarded for good aim. Not just good movement and good positioning and good choices and whatever else, and also a little bit of luck. So this big guy, if I'm going to get around him, that little box there that's appearing, that's his weak spot, and the game is very clearly telling me, shoot here. If my aim is good, if I'm a skilled player, I get rewarded for that with extra damage and therefore a better chance of killing this guy before he kills me. Which is not the case. Mr. Gunny, good to have you back, man.
It never stops.
It does never stop. I hope you've all enjoyed me dying over and over again as I try to talk and play at the same time. So an example of longer-term progression, what's called ether. So you'll notice there in the bottom right corner of the screen, there are 19... There are 19 ethers that I've collected so far. And I can use those in a bunch of different ways throughout the game. I can either choose to use them to cure malignancy in different items throughout the game, whether it's chests or whatever else. Or I can choose to save them up and spend them at this thing. And this thing essentially allows me to unlock new relics in the game. Relics are quite a common concept in roguelites, where it's an item of some sort that gives you a permanent buff for the duration of that run, but when you die, you lose it. And it taps into what we talked about near the beginning of the episode with regard to synergy, or the concept of synergy in a roguelite. So we're going to go ahead and use this guy and get something new. It's quite similar as well to what's called a gacha. A gacha is something that's quite common in a lot of mobile games where you spend a certain type of currency to earn a random prize. It's a term that's sort of derived from sort of actual gacha machines, Japanese-style gacha machines, where you put in some money or whatever else, and the little ball comes out with a prize inside it. And this is exactly what this is. The reason that usually gacha mechanics are offered, instead of just saying to the player, hey, what do you want from this shop-style experience, rather than allowing me to like go into a menu and pick what I want, the game gives me random rewards, which does a couple of things, but mainly it stops me being able to just get all the best things that I want and then no longer have any reason to keep playing. I have no control over what stuff I get, therefore I might get the really good thing and I might not. And it's more of a reason to keep playing. Okay. Ow. Let's do the door problem. If I die this early on, I'm done, guys. Not really. I promise I'm much better at the Ascent. You also tend to find that games as an experience, they come in different genres, but they also come in different sorts of types of experience for the player. So, referencing the Ascent there, the Ascent is what you'd call a power fantasy. It's a game where it doesn't really rely on much skill from the player, it's more just play and progress and have a great time, and eventually you reach the end. Roguelites, on the other hand, tend to require a bit more skill from the player, and this results in a very different type of audience. So whenever you're designing a game, it's something you want to think about in terms of who am I trying to attract to play this game? Is there an audience for this game? And sort of thinking about the balance between power fantasy and skill. Roguelites also offer a really interesting dynamic with the player, which is that they tend to involve one of two routes to eventual victory. And when I say eventual victory, I mean beating the game. One is skill, where if you're skilled enough, you will progress through the game and eventually beat the game, maybe earlier than somebody else might, because you're more skilled as a player. Your fallback option is time. So in a long enough timeline, I will eventually beat this game and improve at this game and achieve that victory condition. But roguelites in particular are quite black and white in terms of offering that dynamic to a player. Oh, running into a wall. Pro skills. Another concept that's often referred to in game design is mastery. Mastery is exactly what it sounds like. It's ways and means for the player to get better at the game over time. Another term that's usually used in the industry is what's called the skill ceiling. So how high is the ceiling of the game in terms of skill? How much room is there for the player to actually get better at this game? So in an example like Mario, the skill ceiling is quite low, but it's still high enough that it gives you a little bit of time to get better at the game by platforming better, which is why the levels slowly get harder and harder over time, because your skills at platforming are getting better and better as you play. In more sort of mature games, the skill ceiling tends to be even higher still. In very hardcore games like Overwatch, for example, the skill ceiling is incredibly high. There's a lot of room for getting better at the game, which appeals to a very specific type of player, a hardcore player. Hardcore players, you tend to find are a lot more dedicated to the game, and that comes with a whole bunch of different sort of consequences and ramifications and experiences. But in Returnal, when it comes to mastery, they offer a couple of different things to give the player something to bear in mind. So one of them is this little mechanic that you've probably seen a couple of times, and I've not referred to this episode because we talked about it last time, but since we're talking about mastery, which is a different concept, I think it's worth bringing up. So this little mechanic here, when I'm shooting, and then I run out of bullets, this little guy right here, that little bar, this is what's called an active reload mechanic. So you've seen it probably in other games like Gears of War. Active reload mechanics basically mean that the reload system is a bit more, interactive. So rather than just pressing a button to reload, I time my button press just right, I get a reward for that. This is an example of mastery in Returnal. I don't have to do this thing, and it's also quite hard to do this when I'm firing the gun and I'm fighting enemies, but if I get good enough, I will eventually become much better at doing this, and I feel better as a result because I'm playing better and making use of the mechanics the game's giving me more often. So finding ways to offer players mastery in your game is often a very good shout, but what kind of mastery you offer them and how high your skill ceiling is very much depends on the kind of audience that you're looking to attract. We have 5 minutes left, guys, so any other questions you might have about the game's design, do please shout out. So I really hope you've enjoyed the content. We've touched on some really cool stuff. Like I say, the first episode of Returnal is also on the channel, and as is the first episode on The Ascent, which we're going to be looking at again not this Wednesday, next week, next Monday. Same time, same place. Like, ever since lockdown, I've lost all sense of time and space. I have no idea where I am, and I have no idea when it is. Wow. Well, I think that's a good time to wrap up, to be honest, folks. I really hope you've enjoyed the content. Like I said before, if you have, do please follow and check out the next episode. You can also find the VODs of the previous episodes on the channel. If you're interested in game design-related stuff, whether it's information or news or whatever else, then do please check out my Twitter, which is at Arran Topalian. That's an interesting question, Naked Martian. I tend to give games a little bit of a play before I play them. I like to have a sense of what I'd like to call out for you guys, so I'm going into the stream with some sort of nuggets of interesting content. There are times, though, where I'll go in just fresh and just kind of call things out as I see them. But by and large, I tend to play games. I'm a big game player in general. Like, I play games pretty much consistently. That's all I do. I don't go out, man. So because of that, I tend to just play games anyway and notice things and also talk about them with my partner. And then from there, I just bring things up. But I am planning on kicking off some bonus episodes in the near future. Bonus episodes will be kind of like singular episodes on specific games that won't be airing on the typical sort of Monday to Wednesday sessions. And those are likely games that I'll just go into fresh. Cool. So thank you very much again, everyone, for coming along. If that sounds fun, then I'm happy to accommodate you. If you'd like to see me stomp at some bad design, then I'm absolutely up for that game. That sounds like a fun experience to me. So stay tuned. I'm going to get a bonus episode out soon. Let's go into a game fresh together, and you can watch me puzzle over why something is the way it is, and you can just listen to me figure it out on the spot. That sounds fun for me as well. Okay, guys, thanks very much again. I'm going to let you go, but yeah, stay tuned for more episodes, and thank you very much again for coming along. It means an awful lot. Thank you.